going to talk about we're going to talk about a topic that is on the minds of many leaders, which is how to meet people where they are, help them build effective coping skills, and in turn, be more resilient during difficult times. I need to just get rid of this notification on my screen here. Excuse me. Okay, so let's start by and we're going to breathe with socks. We're going to go through the first part of the meditation experience in our mental health game, Sinasprite. And as I'm getting things set up here, what I'll ask you to do is find a comfortable position to sit in. And let's see if I can do this. All right, here we go. All right. Did I switch the screen over okay? Can you see that? All right, let's see here. Okay, that was a very short one, but how are we all feeling? Feel free to enter your thoughts in the chat, or if you want to share verbally, that's totally welcome as well. Anyone want to feel like you're sharing? Aparna, how are you feeling? You know, it was quite the micro intervention.
Yeah, I love starting meetings and like my day with some deep breaths. It just like, even when I'm feeling really flustered, it kind of helps me get really centered. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Feeling great this morning. Yes, the weather absolutely does. And some people are feeling good. So that's awesome. So you can see how some of these techniques can be really helpful. So a little bit about me as an individual. I grew up in the Midwest. I'm a first generation immigrant. I'm South Asian of descent. So I bring a range of backgrounds and experiences. And as a kid, since I was a kid, I've always been passionate about how technology can improve people's health. And so I've focused my career in building my subject matter expertise and experience around this topic. In college, I studied biomechanics and bioengineering. I started my career working as an entrepreneur in residence at Eastman Kodak, and we were part of a group that was tasked to identify businesses that would generate 200 to 300 million in revenue within 5 years. I was focused on the healthcare sector, and this was in the late 90s. So the application of technology in healthcare mainly was focused on medical devices and diagnostics. But I was intrigued on how technology could empower people to take care of their own health. We call that field today digital health. My work led me to work with a variety of emerging technologies, including wearables. And in 2001, I was recruited by Nike to support their efforts in commercializing wearable tech. And I wrote their first wearable technology patents. In 2010, I was evangelizing the use of machine learning and big data in healthcare through my strategic development role at Microsoft Research. And then I was recruited by T-Mobile to create consumer-facing mobile health experiences. And I also worked at Primera Blue Cross in corporate strategy to help the firm implement the policy changes due to the ACA. So as a healthcare technologist, what I observed from all of these experiences that individual motivation was the key, not technology. And that was really important in terms of if you wanted to improve a person's health. And games do that effectively. So I started researching this area, and I discovered over 40 peer-reviewed research papers that showed that games could improve clinical outcomes. but there were few commercial efforts and even fewer that focused on chronic condition management. And seeing this as an opportunity, I launched Litesprite. I'm a recognized international healthcare leader by organizations such as the US State Department. I've contributed my insights in private roundtables that focused on the advancement of healthcare technologies with senior HHS and FCC officials and members of Congress. I'm an active participant in the Consumer Technology Association's Mental Health Technology Solutions Work Group and wrote the metrics section on the upcoming standards document. So really quick, in case you're wondering what Litesprite does, we're a leading health entertainment game studio. We deliver improved clinical outcomes and data insights through clinically validated inclusive games, which empower self-management of chronic conditions to help people lead a happier and healthier life. Our clinical results have garnered over 30 global health innovation awards, including the first video game to win a US Surgeon General award. So many of you have seen your clients, employees, or loved ones experience mental health challenges over the past year. Some of you have even had your own. The World Health Organization has recently stated that there is a parallel pandemic to COVID-19, a mental health crisis. In the US, the number of people suffering from mental health issues has doubled. A CDC survey now found that 42% of Americans have a mental health challenge. There's a 3x increase in reports of depression and anxiety symptoms. 41% of employees now report that they are more burned out than a year ago, and 35% are hesitant to discuss this with their manager. This means that employers need to show more intentional support to support for employees' mental health, but spotting signs of burnout is harder in hybrid and remote work environments. 90% of employers have indicated that virtual mental health is a top priority and now offer therapy and self-help apps. But they're still looking beyond these options because they don't bridge the ever-widening care gap. It can take months to be seen by a clinician. There are thousands of apps who have very little evidence that they're even effective, including the most popular ones. Conventional methods to get employee feedback, such as surveys and structured conversations, are inefficient and don't surface the true cause of burnout. So there are many things to consider when you're thinking about meeting people where they are and offering solutions that go beyond mental health and that have a meaningful impact, or go beyond well-being and have a meaningful impact on a person's mental health. In the interest of time, I'll give you a broad overview of some of the unique factors to consider. It's important to do your own due diligence, and just because a service is widely implemented or popular doesn't mean they effectively address these topics. So first, the most important thing is, what are the clinical outcomes? Is it a metric that is accepted by healthcare professionals? For example, in the US, physicians commonly use the GAD, or generalized anxiety disorder, as a screening tool for anxiety. Next, what is the evidence base of the solution? Do they have any publications in peer-reviewed journals? Is the population in the study similar to your population? For example, I saw one popular app that was making claims they had peer-reviewed evidence. And then when I looked at the paper, the population wasn't one that was representative of employers. The population in the study was college students with traumatic brain injury. What is the therapy approach that is used? What is the evidence base for that approach? For example, evidence-based approaches include DBT, which is dialectic behavior therapy, that is a subset of cognitive behavior therapy. Another therapy approach is ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. All of these approaches teach different skills, can be more effective with specific groups, populations, and diagnoses. Who is the population you want to reach? Is it third shift workers? Do you need a solution that's available globally? Do your employees need help with their family members? What's the privacy policy of the service? This is important, especially if they're collecting data. There have been numerous stories about data and privacy breaches with many of the popular services. What is the escalation pathway if there's a crisis? Do they follow current best practices for both of these topics? Engagement metrics is one that many on this call will be familiar with, but the important thing here is that these engagement metrics should have a clinical relevance, meaning that it's tied to an outcome or driving a specific behavior. For example, a person using a solution multiple times a day is not necessarily a good thing for mental health. End user feedback is always very important. Many of you may be familiar with gamification. You will now start to see more solutions like ours in the market that will be the evolution of gamification and move towards fully immersive game experiences. What are the analytics that are offered to help organizations better support their employees? So as an example of some of these topics, let's walk through our Sinasprite, which is our mental health video game. So Sinasprite, first of all, is based on a commonly accepted psychological framework of Bandura's social cognitive theory. We teach a combination of evidence-based methods and mindfulness strategies, which are presented as modules or mini games. You may be familiar with many of these techniques, but why is this framework important? Why do these techniques work? The techniques that are presented in Sinasprite evoke the relaxation response. Recall how you felt after the 15-second breathing exercise. The game's psychological framework targets the player's self-efficacy, self-control, reinforcement, and coping skills. So the journaling mini game that we have is based on CBT, cognitive behavior therapy. This allows the player to examine and shift through their thoughts from ruminative to action-oriented. Visualization expands the ability to rest and relax by focusing a person's mind on more calming images. Breathing increases oxygen to the body, slows the heart rate, and can lower blood pressure. Meditation helps with achieving and sustaining focus. And during duress, this is one of the most difficult things to do. Practicing gratitude shifts a person's thinking from negative outcomes to positive. This also elicits feel-good hormones such as dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. Using our multiplayer mode, it builds social connection and prevents isolation and loneliness, a particular issue with older adults. Painting and art therapy is a safe place to express feelings and self-discovery. It allows for a player to feel more in control. Impacts include improved perception, self-perception, personal integration, emotion, impulse regulation, and behavior change. So this should give us a good framework to have a conversation. And Aparna, I will hand it off to you.
Swatee, thank you so much for sharing the different components that can help us manage our anxiety, and I think a lot of other sort of mental health issues that we face on a day-to-day basis. Some of my favorites are definitely the gratitude piece. I started that practice about 1.5 years ago, and it's been a total game changer for me. And I've just, really appreciated taking time every single day to think about things that kind of help my brain, I don't know, calm down, for lack of a better word. Like, of course, I'm not a clinician by any stretch of the imagination. Okay, so I have a couple of questions for you. And then if anybody who's listening or watching has questions, please go ahead and pop them in the chat. And we'll answer them. But I want to start with, what are some of the myths around mental health that you're seeing with users, client, customers, like in the ether? Like, what are things that we don't know or we're not asking?
Sure. I think one of the things that, and I think you're kind of seeing this in the evolution, the one big myth is that it's a one and done thing, that it's a one size fits all. I should say, not one and done, but that's another myth. We'll get to that one. But the big one is that, well, we offer therapy, we have EAP, that should be enough. Or, well, we have a meditation app, and that's not the case at all. The one big challenge with mental health is that it manifests itself very differently with different people, because there's cultural contacts, there's employment, environment context, family context, but also just the individual and what their preferences are and what are they comfortable with. A lot of people find therapy difficult to access because they're not comfortable talking to somebody, for example, or in the case of third shift workers, for example, they're not even, they can't access the therapist because no one's working when they're awake. So I think this idea that, one size fits all, and that, if you have a solution, that means that you've taken care of you've addressed the issue. The other one is that it is as I mentioned, the second myth, which is also equally important, is it's a one and done scenario, which is not the case at all. Mental health, usually what typically happens is, people think that, okay, well, you had an episode, and I think that people might be thinking about this even with their own journey with COVID. Well, yeah, I was really stressed out, or I had a situation and I was really depressed, but I'm over it and I'm done. But what really happens is, yes, you were done with that particular scenario, but then what happens is life happens. Things get more stressful. You have one event after another. And typically for most people, it's not one thing, because you can handle one thing, but when it's a multitude that kind of pile up on top of each other, then it becomes challenging. And then you find yourself, and so then it's a cycle, right? You'll be okay for a while and you're fine, your coping skills work, and hopefully that'll be longer if you have good coping skills. But sometimes you're still going to need support and help. And so that's that other thing about it's a one and done scenario. You have to be committed to supporting the person on their journey. So
that's really helpful to hear, like that you have to support people on their journey. I've also heard you like reference third shift workers, and what it's bringing up for me is this idea that we need to build products and tools for who workers are. And you gave the example of a lot of these things being tested on college students, which is great, except for a lot of workplaces are not representative of, predominantly like a white student population at like a tier 1 research institution. And so I'm curious, like how do we get better at identifying solutions that have been tested in the kind of environments in which we're working and leading? How do we do that as folks that are not, like embedded in the research community oftentimes?
well, I mean, so this is actually a very exciting opportunity in time, because now with technology tools as they are and solutions, there's a move in the community towards what's called, and this started by the way, in 2008 with the NIH and the NSF, even saying that standard clinical trial processes and approaches, which is like, randomized control trials, are not the appropriate approach for digital solutions, because digital solutions change so quickly that by the time you get everything done and it's published, like everyone's on to the next thing, right? So what's the point of doing the research? Because that's not helpful. It's not helpful doing research or having publication or showing something works when no one's going to use the platform. So now there's this notion there of an encouragement of real world evidence, right? So collecting evidence in the real world. And yeah, you can, then there are other ways you can talk about efficacy. So that's a whole nother topic. But the opportunity here now is that employers themselves can be part of that research process, right? If they're wanting to go there in an anonymized form, very similar to, you can run your own, and I don't even, not pilot necessarily, but trials, right? And that's what we see. We've run our trials in a real world evidence case. We weren't even working with employers. We're just having it available to the general public. And you will see research studies. There are good ones out there that have done, you look at their methodology, who did they recruit? Even if they've recruited them at a clinic, that's okay. What you want to see is what was the population, right? For example, underserved communities have different need profiles than an employer group. So if you're targeting, if your workforce is coming from underserved communities, they're going to have different needs. So maybe you think about looking at evidence-based and research that talks about the health and equity issues that underserved communities have. So I think there's a couple of ways that employers can do that. They can even now, it's a wonderful opportunity. People can actually get involved in building the research.
That's amazing. I love that. Can you talk a little bit about, in this day and age, right? Like we've been living through almost 2.5 years of the global pandemic. What is an employer's responsibility, as you see it, to support like employee mental health and well-being?
Sure. I think the first responsibility is recognizing the diversity of the needs that their employees have. That's the first and foremost. And to do the best that they can to provide that variety of tools and services to help meet people where they are. Part of that, just going back to that fact that one size fits all, that's just not going to work. And then the other responsibility is that it's important that the employer has a culture, has policies and procedures that don't actively create or perpetuate an environment that has adverse impact on someone's mental health, right? And those organizations that I would even go so far as those that take a leadership position helps them in this particular instance and are very intentional about that workplace culture. They can attract and retain top talent. And the last one, which we don't really even talk about, but sometimes that can even mean making sure that you've got the right people in the right role. Sometimes the role itself is just not a fit for somebody. So then you need to find them something else, or, kind of move them on, which is not an easy conversation, but that's also part of mental health. Sometimes people stick around or do things or stay in a role that maybe that's not the best thing for them.
Yeah, that's really helpful to know. So you've been building this product, I feel like, in a really conscientious way, with testing in sort of real life scenarios, really testing which of these sort of therapeutic modalities are going to work for what populations. Like broad strokes, like what are you learning from all of the implementations that you're doing? Like what does it really take to help people feel good? And yeah, like what kinds of mental health challenges are you seeing being addressed?
Sure. So the first thing, we've learned a lot, which is why, we've gotten all the awards that we had. We've been learning a lot, and we've been teaching and helping people along the learning journey with us, right? We bring in as many people as we can. The thing that we're learning time and time again is that the clinical validation is it's important. It's a cornerstone. It's a foundational piece. If you really want to move the needle, that's really important. And so, and that's actually one of the things that our clients value for us, whether it's a therapist, it's a health system, a payer, an insurance company, or even and an employer. And now employers, right? Because they're getting smart. They're realizing the problem. The independent validation that we've had, whether it's through the military or working with universities, that is a big important thing now. And how we've been able to do it. And the fact that, honestly, one thing we learned is this package that we created in this experience, which is very calming and actually can reach people. And we can be able to reach a wide range of individuals and populations. That's the second thing I'll get to in a second. But the thing actually works. Like that was the big thing. Okay, we put all these things together. We know CBT works and has some evidence, mindfulness and techniques and other techniques have been, helpful, right? There's some question on, are they really effective, but they can certainly help with mood. But putting them all together in this format, will that even work? Right. So we've gotten that. That's the first thing. Second, who does it work for? We've learned that it appeals to a wide age range, which is kind of interesting because we targeted it towards a casual gamer demographic, which is 40-year-old women or 40s or 50s. But what we found is we've got broad appeal and a pretty good appeal with men and women as well. So 4 to 65, and the split's about 60-40, 60% female, 40% male. So that's it. And then also just even reaching hard to motivate populations, or difficult to reach populations, I should say, as the underserved. Or individuals that have high acuity or complex health issues. So when we've been in a clinical setting, individuals that we've had that we've worked with were folks that had diagnoses of bipolar, substance abuse, PTSD, severely mentally ill, transgendered individuals going through transitions, and had suicidal ideations. We've been used as an adjunct as they've gone through their therapy. And the third thing we've learned is how much we are a trusted tool for our end users. We routinely get reports about how we've helped them through some of the most vulnerable points in their lives. We've walked them through panic attacks. So that's a really important thing, like that notion of trust. And there are a lot of people, and understandably so, because of all these breaches and, fairly unethical things. Most people don't trust apps, but they trust this. And you can see, you kind of got a flavor for the experience. And then lastly, one thing we're learning is that data that we are collecting, we started off in a clinical environment and providing data to allow for remote patient monitoring, but employers are finding a subset, an anonymized subset of that information really helpful in addressing burnout, which was one of those issues I had mentioned previously.
So speaking of, like therapy, I'm curious, employers bringing in tools to support employee mental health, are they a substitute for working with a therapist? Or is it a companion to folks going out and, working with a practitioner? What are your recommendations and sort of best practice examples in this case?
So it can be used in both scenarios. We've been used in both. And that's one of the actual unique things about Sinasprite. We can be used as a self-help tool, but if someone is seeing a therapist, it can be used as what they call an adjunct or in support. In fact, we were talking to a few behavioral health companies to be offered as a support tool in addition to their therapy services. But a best place to start is as a self-help tool. We see our players actually use it in 3 different scenarios. So it is one as a preventative measure, and in that case, it's a self-help tool. They want to learn skills. They're curious about understanding more about themselves. Just more kind of like a pocket knife a pocket knife of tools that they can use when they're struggling. The second one is that when they are experiencing a mental health challenge, and it may even be very acute, as I mentioned, even up to the extent of a panic attack. And then the third is reinforcement, where what we've seen is that people will use this, and again, back to that continuum of mental health, they're fine, they don't need help, they're kind of managing things along, but then life happens and there's a ton of stuff that happens, and then they come back and they actually start replaying the game. So we can span that care continuum. And what's interesting is that actually starts to normalize and destigmatize this notion of taking care of your mental health.
Oh, I love it. Okay, so I have sort of one last question. For organizations, big and small, and I think like in particular, you know, non-enterprise scale organization, nonprofits, smaller companies, like what's the best place to start as an organization? What are your tips for people that want to maybe make a case with leaders to start adding, you know, more tools to the employee toolbox, if you will?
Yeah. So I would say, what I would suggest, if you're trying to start the conversation, I heard two things.
Yeah.
It sounds like there were kind of two questions in there, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So let me take one at a time. So the first thing is, if you're trying to make a case for this type of solution, um, the first thing I would do, because as I am data driven and that I'm an engineer, I think you want to bring the data to your decision makers. So that's qualitative. Data is not just quantitative, but it's also qualitative. So first of all, you know, and because there's so much stigma around mental health, the employees need to know that it's okay to have this conversation. It's a safe place. There won't be any adverse consequences, and open up that dialogue. You know, if your HR team hasn't already received reports about mental health challenges, ask them about and ask them if they're open and willing to share what their mental health needs are, not what the issues they're dealing with, but what are their needs. That's two different things, right? You may not want to know that the guy's going, you know, you know, someone's going through a divorce, or, you know, you don't necessarily need to know about a family member who has cancer, right? Because that's what their issues are. But what are their needs? Are they feeling isolated? Are they feeling overwhelmed? Are they confused? Right? Those are the needs. So you want to focus on that first. And then to the extent that you can, provide quantitative data. Medical claims, EAP data, look at your utilization of different services. That's a secondary way of looking at it. If your broker is not able to provide that data for you, then that's you might want to push them on that, because they should have that information. And if they don't, then maybe you want to think about that differently. But that's another thing. And so you can start to build the case. Now, if you can't get that kind of information, look for industry specific reports about the state of mental health in your industry. And then you could use that as a proxy. That might actually open up the conversation with your leaders to give you access to that information. The other thing is, you guys can certainly work with us. Individuals can certainly work with us to address the mental health challenges that they're having.
And is there like a free version of your tool that like someone like me can download and use?
Yes, we have a free version. It's part of our social mission. Sinasprite's available on both Android and iOS. It's limited in its functionality, but you'll get everything. Then you can also buy up individually. we have with our enterprises, we have the data recording capability, as I mentioned, that really helps organizations be much more responsive to needs. But then we also have group pricing as well.
That's awesome. Okay. If folks have questions, Swatee, I think that you'd probably be game to answer a couple. If not, we are gonna start to wrap up, and we'll share some resources with you via email, including a link to download the free version of the tool and just try some of these things yourself. So I'll just take a pause from talking. Yeah, does anybody have a question for Swatee that you're really curious about?
Mhm.
I have a question. I was going to put it in the chat and I thought it might be easier to just speak it. Is it super clear to the user that the information, like what information is or isn't shared with the employer? You talked about that subset of anonymized data, and I'm sure that their private information is protected, but I just wouldn't want any user to feel hesitant to share because they had any feelings of uncertainty around that.
Yeah, I think we work when it's being implemented, we work with the team to make sure that the messaging that's all part about managing expectations up front. And so we work with the teams, and when they're setting up the collateral, pushing out the announcement, we're very clear about what's shared and what's not. And by the way, we only do that for organizations that are of a minimum size. Also, like 100 people, that's too small of a group. So there's that reporting is also only available for organizations that have a big enough population where that anonymity can be also preserved.
Yeah, and that's good, sort of good data practices anyways, right? Like if something's going to be confidential and anonymous, then you need lots of people in a group to be able to report back on their experience. Thank you so much for the folks that joined. We're gonna upload this to YouTube, and it's going to be available for you to come back to. Swatee, thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great day to everybody that was able to join us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Feel free to reach out. We're here.